Hello everyone, welcome to the video. Today we are going to learn about the London system, and today's video is going to be a bit long, so I must give you the warning right away from the start. But I assure you that I'll be trying to cover many lines in London system, and these suggestions that I'll be giving today have been taken from different authors of different books, different lectures, different players, insights from different players as well, and different games. Okay, so the point is, I've I was trying to search about the material that is out there regarding London system. Actually, there's a lot, but I could not find much details. If when I started digging in and I was trying to be more interested in finding the right way to play the London, what I was ending in was more of trap videos or maybe something of win in 5 moves, 10 moves, things like that. But in reality, I find this won't work in most of the cases. So I thought of just making a video myself. I Before I start, it's the assumption that most of the players watching this video will have decent idea of how do you play the London system, and I will be trying to avoid trappy lines, but I'll be mentioning some traps if while mentioning the lines. If I encounter some traps in the game, then I'll show it. But I suggest if you want to just learn the traps, this video is not for you. You can just type London system traps. Dozens of video is Dozens of videos are out there on YouTube, and you can just watch from there. Today's video is more about a deep research on the London system. So I hope you will appreciate the work. And with that said, let's start the video. So basically, first of all, we go d4. And the point is we want to bring the bishop out. We want to play pawn e3, pawn c3, knight here, nb d2, bishop here, and eventually we try to control e5. Okay. Now, many times nowadays, if someone starts with pawn to d5, then we can directly play bishop to f4 and we are fine because we are revealing our cards. But many times I have seen players don't go for pawn to d5 move right away. They play something like knight f6 more. And with knight f6, the difference is they are not showing their true intention out there. They maybe want to go for c5, kind of a Benoni structure, or maybe in the next move they can go something like d6, g6, king's Indian setup, or even they can play something like e6 and d5 later on, changing into queen's gambit decline, or just pawn e6 and b6, something like a queen's Indian kind of a setup. So long story short, there's a lot of flexibility what black has after knight f6, which is not so the case if black plays the move d5 right away. So after knight f6, now if white has already decided that okay, white has to go for bishop f4, there's no need to just clear the thought out there, put the thought out there on the board that okay, I'm going for the London system. You can also try to be a bit more flexible here. You can play knight f3. So now by playing knight f3, you can also say that okay, fine, I can change into queen's gambit structure, or after that I can also play something like g3 Catalan structure. Maybe I'm not so sure. Maybe I'll just play bishop f4. So that's how you are not revealing to black that okay, I want to go directly bishop f4. Suppose if you play directly bishop f4, you are just putting the word out there that okay, you will be going for the London system, and that's fine in some sense. But suppose if you're playing in a tournament, it's generally recommended that you should be kind of playing. You just don't play on the board, you also play the opponent, right? So that's the whole point. So anyways, the game goes on and black plays pawn d5. Now white can play bishop f4 because it's now the time to show the cards. So black is not going for something like b6, g6, e6. So at least not for the first part. I have keep these variations on the side. These variations will be covered at the end of the video in the last part. So after bishop f4, d5, bishop f4, now black again has to make a decision. Black wants to play early c5 or maybe just go for the normal setup by playing pawn e6. e6 has been chosen by black. So we go e3 and bishop to d6. Now here there are two ways to continue and both the ways are equally popular. Knight to e5 is one of the methods and bishop g3 is the other method. Now bishop g3 is slightly more preferable because the idea is they will never take, because for take the rook has a very strong attack on h7, the bishop sits here, and you will find lot many games and lot many videos are also out there that explain how does this work. You can eventually castle on the long side, play g4 g5 at the right time, and usually white is always fine. Now the point is, after pawn to c6, let's stop there for a moment and now let's try to understand what are the plans white and black try to go for in London system. So basically, you are saying that white's pieces are controlling e5 square a lot many times, and black is also trying to fight for the e5 square. Now the move c6 is decent, but I believe c5 is a better choice to directly attack the center. Anyways, so black has two things to do. Number one, black will try to castle as fast as possible. Number two, black wants to play pawn e5. So that's one thing, one idea from black that we should always be aware of, that every time black will try to play e5. In the coming games or coming positions that I'll be showing you the intentions of black more and more, and it will be getting clear to you guys that how differently sometimes black denies castling. Sometimes black says that, okay, I don't want to castle right away. First of all, I want to solve the problem in the center. And how can then we take advantage of those kind of ideas? So we'll look into that in the coming few minutes. Here, white's plan is very simple. White want to take control of e5. Also, at some point, white wants to go for bishop d3, queen e2, pawn e4 setup. So white needs a break of e4, which white gets very comfortably in most of the cases. Let's go forward with this idea. So after pawn to c6, knight to d2, developing move in the London system, and queen to c7. So now there are two variations. First of all, queen c7 and queen to e7. I'll be starting with queen to c7, and every, like, these two variations have two different ideas. The move queen to c7, we can now jump into a Stonewall setup. Now what is a Stonewall setup? Once we put the knight on e5, something like this, and if my opponent plays something like nbd7, I don't want to play something like knight to f3. That's not the best way to play actually. The best way to play is pawn f4. Now this setup is called as the Stonewall system. Usually when white plays Stonewall, the bishop sits on c1, but this time our bishop is already out there on g3. And in Stonewall system, there's an opening called as boiling frog. You can just type the name on YouTube or maybe on Google. You'll be finding a lot many crazy ideas in boiling frog. But still in boiling frog, what happens? That bishop stays there on c1 square, and eventually the bishop starts maneuvering on d2, e1, h4, and then it takes on f6. But here our job is already kind of simple, because we can go bishop h4 and bishop into f6 at some point. So we'll look into that. Now it's important to explain why this move is bad. Because first of all, you want to put a pawn here, okay? And now you are allowing knight to e4 and knight takes g3 in many lines. So knight e4 happens and we are not able to survive this. So the problem is, now after this takes, you're losing the control of e5. The moment you lose e5, first of all, you're down a pawn, and also black is now better. So the fight is about e5 square. The moment you lose control of e5, black will gain equality. Okay, so it's like plus 0.35 or something, usually, or 0.4, something like that it starts with. But if you allow e5 to happen, it changes to minus 0 point something. So something to keep notice of. Anyway, so we go with pawn f4, and the main theme in queen c7 variation is that we try to go for the Stonewall system with our bishop on g3 if they play queen to c7. Now, if they play queen e7, I'll be showing it in the next part. How do we deal with it? First of all, let's focus here. Now, here there are many ways from black to reply. First of all, they can decide to castle. If they decide to castle, it's kind of fine. But now we have kind of a king side attack by playing some moves like probably bishop to d3, bishop h4, maybe at some point we have g4, g5, something like that. So let's just do it. Bishop to d3 and pawn c5. Now, idea behind pawn c5 is pawn c4. So usually we do pawn c3 in the London system so that even if c4 comes on the board, we are not in trouble. Okay. Now, one more thing, if you notice at this pawn structure, all these pawns are placed on light squares. It means that the c8 bishop is kind of stuck. It wants to come out somewhere. And now black deals with this way, like in couple of ways. Black can play first of all pawn c4. We come back. And then pawn b5, placing the bishop on maybe b7 at some point so that they can get knight to e4. That kind of a setup. The game goes on. We go with the bishop h4, the Stonewall boiling frog idea. So whenever we place the Stonewall system, we have to put our bishop on h4 for a couple of reasons. First of all, it will be taken on f6. Second of all, we have this idea of playing pawn g4, g5 at some point. So the queen can also come out on, suppose if we take, okay, suppose if we take, we have queen f3, queen h3, pawn g4, g5, something like that. So bishop b7, queen f3, b4, castles, takes, rook to b8, because always put the rook on the open file, queen h3, and now we have something like g4 at some point. And usually, okay, so after knight to e4, the idea is that they want to play f6. Okay, and after f6, they want to kick us. And we have to be very careful with this thing. That many times you'll see black will be playing f6 and maybe e5 at some point. But if you realize right now, due to our Stonewall setup, the e5 battle has been won by white. Right? There's no problem in realizing that e5 we have the control. We are not going to lose the control on e5 whatsoever. Now, the idea behind knight to e4 is they want this bishop to be more and more powerful, but actually this is a small mistake. It's white to play. You can pause the video here and you can start thinking how will you evaluate this situation. So now I'll begin. The move from white is knight takes pawn. And here there are a couple of ways in which black can reply. First of all, they can play something like knight f6, and we are just up a pawn, right? We can go d6 and takes. And if it's important to show you if this takes, then we just take, and we are having this open diagonal knight g5 at some point, and we are just having a very good day here. Okay. Now if knight f6, so now we can just take bishop, takes, and we can say that okay, we are having again kind of a decent situation because now we have f5. This bishop will never be useful on this diagonal because this pawn is going to stay there forever. We are going to play f5 at some point. If they don't take us, we'll go f6 as well, and it's going to be kind of a decent game, right? Bishop to g3 is always there, kind of a skewer idea. So they have to play with this rook maybe. Let's try that. f6. Here and now, again, how do we achieve this plan in a very fast manner? So the problem is the bishop. So you can play again bishop g3. Wherever the queen goes, I don't bother much. We have queen h6, and this is kind of checkmate. Let's go back a bit. So this was all about c4. So after c3, there are again kind of different ways to continue. They can play something like Pawn b6, with the idea of playing maybe pawn a5 or bishop b7 directly. The main move with pawn a5 is they want to play bishop a6 and cancel with our bishop. We castle, bishop to b7, queen f3, same idea. And again, you'll see why in the Stonewall setup the bishop has to go here, because it allows some moves like g4, g5 to happen in future. So again, h6 has been played, rook to d1, bringing out the final piece in the game. a6, maybe b5 is coming, bishop h4, bishop e7, and you just take. And now here, after you take, it's not forced that they can take by the bishop. They have to take by the bishop. No, it's not that. They can take by the knight as well. The point is, if you take by the bishop, earlier there was a knight here controlling this square or this square. So the moment you take, so the h4 bishop in Boiling Frog or Stonewall is always meant to take on f6. The moment black takes by the bishop, the g4 and h5 square are not covered. So I can just play queen g4. And something like rook d8, I can play rook f3. I can kind of switch maybe on here, something like that, takes. And it's kind of a one situation. There's a lot many ways to win this, I guess. Queen h6 is coming next move, and the game can go on. Something like rook f7 blunders from queen h6. I'm not going to go in too much detail because I know these moves exactly won't happen in your games. You have to just know the ideas. So after bishop e7, we just take if they take by the knight. Sorry. Now the knight is still controlling the same square, so we just go queen h3. Takes, and now in London you have to kind of remember it. If they try to take your pawn on d4, you have to take by the e pawn. The idea is you want to control the e5 square as many times as you can. So you have to kind of keep maybe one of the rooks to go on e1 at some point if it is necessary. Now knight e4 again happens, which is very common. We start with g4, and that's the whole plan, to move the bishop away and then make space. Go g4, g5 as fast as possible. Rook f3, g5, and again this is kind of a winning situation for us. There are a lot many ways to continue this position again, and you want the rook on g3, right? So you can also imagine how will you solve these problems for yourself. You want the rook on g3, and you have to maybe, and this knight is controlling so many good squares. See, the knight is controlling f6, the knight is controlling g3. One idea can be just at the top of the head. I can play something like, I want actually something like queen h4, queen f6, and then checkmate, right? But the knight is not allowing me. Also, other idea can be rook g3, very important. And then maybe sacrifice something on g6, but this knight is not allowing me, so I just take it. Pawn takes, rook g3, takes, and now you have to again remember this thing. You want more of your material to come on the king side because we are launching the king side attack. So I'll obviously take by the f pawn, f into e5, and same idea. Queen here, there is coming. So queen h4, queen f6, queen g7, takes there. Check, and it's already a checkmate. Like whatever they do, it's kind of okay. So I'll go back. Maybe I'm missing some variations. Obviously, it's not possible to kind of go into every single detail. I'm just stopping at the point where I feel that white is doing pretty well and it's actually better from black. So that's where I'm stopping the discussion. Let's go back. So after f4, again, let's come back to f4. So after f4, they can also go b5. Now this is also a decent idea. Why? Because we want to launch the king side attack. Black has to reply with the queen side attack. So whenever you realize that the center is closed, usually what happens, players start attacking on the flanks. Either white attacks, if white is attacking on the right flank, black is supposed to attack on the left flank. So something like that. Now b5 is kind of important. This move should not be done first because we have a4 to stop b5. So b5 first, and we go c3. We are just playing the normal setup we know. Okay, now a5, and now we bring our bishop, the final piece in the game. Castles, bishop h4. Same idea every single time. So when you understand a setup, you understand the placement of the pieces, where a piece is supposed to go. And in many lines, you see that it gets repetitive, right? It's get kind of in your head that you start calculating that maybe this is the right move. Yeah, and most of the times it's true. So something to understand, that bishop h4, bishop a6, rook c1, c5, castles, b4, c4. Because we don't want to allow this bishop a6 to happen. Usually we go here, takes, keeping eye on d6. And also you should understand that this file is also kind of opening up, because earlier, few moves back, the file was closed. Both c and d were closed, but now there's something going on right now. And maybe if something like knight d5 happens, there's a small trick here. So again, you can pause the video and you should start calculating what's the trick here. I won't call it as a trick or something, but yes, these are positional mistakes what happen, which looks nice. Yeah. So again, they want to play f6, but now is not the time. Now it's not the right time to play f6. You can pause the video. I'll just continue anyways. So the main idea is that if the D and C file gets opened up, it's just crushing. So I guess just go knight d6, takes, bishop takes. Then I want to gain a tempo on the rook maybe. Rook a7, takes, and I take a pawn. And now it's not just a pawn, it's actually a passed pawn. And I have e4 coming, and again, it's kind of a very strong position. Queen c2, and again, white is better. White is clearly better. Okay, let's go back. If suppose in the same trick that I was talking about, after this bishop takes, rook takes, queen e2, and now if something like first knight e5 happens, now we have takes attacking on the queen. Queen has to keep the defense of the rook, so queen goes here, and now e4 first. Knight goes back, bishop e7, tempo on the rook, and now we take c5, and this is again clearly winning. So whatever they do doesn't matter. The game can continue, and you'll find that okay, there's a lot many ways to continue here. Okay, so this was about the Stonewall system in the London. When we come to this particular setup in which the bishop is on d6, queen is on c7, and the pawn is on like you are also kind of playing the London, the opponent is also playing the semi-Slav London system, something like that. So the pawn is on c6. Now, also, I guess it can be said that the pawn need not to only be on c6. It can be, I guess, on c5 as well. I guess this is also fine. So it's the same system with one move, one tempo less, extra less for black. And I guess I've shown most of the ideas. Maybe a5 can be done, but a4 just stops it. So now b5 cannot be done. That's why b5 was slightly better. That's when I said. And yeah, c4 I've already told. So now let's stop the Stonewall system. Let's go to the next setup, in which right now what's the difference in this setup? The queen was on c7. I'll show you a similar thing, but now I'll play the queen on e7. So now let's try to again go for practical chess, in which queen is on e7. Okay, so now we have reached the situation, and black wants to play bishop d6, pawn e5. So every time black will have the same plan to play bishop to d6 and pawn to e5. Now knight d2 was played, bishop d6, and again bishop you can play knight here, but usually you have to just come back on g3. That's more comfortable. Now in this, earlier we have tried queen c7. Now we'll try queen e7. Very important. So now this is a different setup. So the idea is with queen e7 again to play e5, and you have to block e5 by playing the very obvious knight e5. And black can castle here, which is completely fine. There's nothing wrong in that. Actually, that's the main move. But what if black tries to Before castling, black tries to go for solving the problem of e5. So black tries to go for knight d7. The idea is now black is attacking too many times. So can you go for pawn f4? So probably f4. Okay, after castles I can just go, right? So you can play bishop d3, I can just go f6 maybe. And now you are getting kicked. So that's a small problem, I guess. That's a small problem. And I don't think so that white is any better here. So now Stonewall system doesn't work. After knight e5, knight e7, you have to understand that usually the main move is to castle. But here black is not doing that. So when black doesn't do that, black creates some some small nuance, some small difference in the position. Usually the main move is castling, but if black plays something like knight d7, black king is still in the center. And they want to take on e5 three times. You're defending only twice. f4 doesn't do any good because after castle I play f6 as black. So here you can play a very important move to not allow one of the knights to move, which is bishop b5. And now even if you take me by one knight, that's fine. I take you like this, the other knight cannot be moved because it's frozen or it's under pin, whatever you can call it. Bishop c7 and now queen g4. The idea behind this move is to provoke something like maybe g6 or king f8. Now, I don't believe casting can be done here because we have bishop h4, bishop f6, something like bishop h4. Knight e5 will not work because if you are in a situation where your queen is under attack and opponent's queen is also under attack, that side will have that advantage who has the initiative, meaning who will be taking the opponent's queen first. So here I'll be having an initiative. I can just take knight takes and bishop c5. Now why bishop c5? Because the rook is anyways trapped. After this I can just trap the rook. Whatever happens, it's completely winning position for you. Okay, after this I guess this f6, but I can just take rook f6. I can just, and this is again kind of completely winning situation. You can just play for, I mean you can just continue the play, but you are completely fine in this situation. Another move can be queen to d7, moving away, and we go bishop f6. And something like if this is provoked, you have to again understand how do you go all in. So something like queen g5, queen h6. Okay. So after queen g4, suppose if king f8 is played. The king f8 is decent. Nobody is denying that. But now you should understand that f file needs to be opened up. So you can calculate that again. I can go for the stone. Something like f4, h5. We need to back. a6, bishop back, because the bishop was not doing much. The bishop has fulfilled the job on b5, so it needs to come back on this very important diagonal. And after we castle, we have the same plan, almost the same plan. And can you see, we are again in a similar kind of a situation where black has not castled, but black has started the flank attack on the queen side, and we are doing kind of a flank attack on the king side. Special focus is on this f file. Something to continue, a4, takes, and the game goes on. Okay, something like g3, rook b1, open file, rook b8, knight f3, takes, king g7, bishop g3, improving slight improvement in the situation. a4, queen c2, d4, bishop here, hanging knight, needs to be protected. We take, check, bishop f2, goes back, we take on c5. Suppose if they take like this, you can block it by queen d3 if you want. And after this, you can continue by f5. And later on, f6 is going to come. I don't see any way to stop it actually. I mean, you can capture me obviously, but again, I'll capture you. And now what will you do? So you cannot do this. This is actually kind of a suicidal case because after bishop f5, not many things are going on. If you play something like rook b8, f6, I can take, And at some point, I'm also having this queen here, here, here. At some point. So maybe I should start with that. The idea is to probably go with the same queen h3. I guess queen h3 can work. Queen h3, queen f8, bishop h6 is fine. And queen e8, bishop g7, queen h8. I guess that should work. Yeah, even this queen d4 is fine. Queen d4, something like queen. I don't see it anything. I guess white is just +1 for no reason, and I guess the game can go on. The play can go on. Okay, if bishop is 7, let's say, so we can just go king f2 here, bishop h6, bishop g7, queen h3 follows. So same idea. Okay, so let's go back. So that was all about king f8. So after suppose queen to g4, if queen to f8 is played. Now this is actually from a game where you don't want the queen to be played on f8. If you play g6, you are weakening your own dark square. Then I have the bishop on the king side. Your bishop, the black's bishop is on c7. It's kind of, again, not so good. We have bishop h4, bishop f6 coming. Everything is going on. So after queen f8, let's see how the game goes on. Bishop takes, and castles. Simple stuff. Bishop a6, rook to e1. And the idea is many times we want to open up the center because the king is not castled. h5. And here the main move can be queen d1, just come back. But white wanted to actually provoke bishop b5 because white wanted to go queen c2 with the a4 tempo on the bishop. So suppose you can just come back to d1, that's fine. But white played queen to a4, provoking bishop b5, queen back c2, h4, bishop f4, bishop here, and now, okay, some tricks now. So white played b4. Now the normal question will be, can this pawn be taken? So you can again time to pause the video and again start thinking if the pawn can be taken. I'll be now going forward with the answer. I don't think so pawn can be taken. Because if you take the pawn and I take you, you take me by however means you want. Maybe by the queen on b4 or bishop b4, you're hanging on c6 and then you're hanging a6 and a8, which is not the case. So here actually you lose the game very fast. And the game goes on and this is just clearly winning. Okay. Suppose black played bishop c7. Now in the game actually black played bishop c7 and white achieves e4. Now this is something I mentioned at the start of the discussion, that white's plan is to achieve this, win the war of e5 and then try to win the war of e4. And black's plan is to castle, which is not there, and to play pawn e5, which is also not there. So eventually we can say that white is clearly better. But again, nothing harm in continuing the game. Queen e7, bishop back because now bishop c5 is coming. Bishop takes and now just knight f3. Why? Because you can take on c5 but bishop d6 happens. But after knight f3, bishop d6, again we want to take here, but first play e5. And bishop takes c5. And you can see that black can never castle. Black can just forget about castling. If black tries to castle on the queen side, it's again kind of suicidal, right? We just take and then bring our both the rooks on a8, a1, b1. It's kind of bad. Queen d2, because the dark squares we want to enter. We want to kind of take entry points somehow on g7, right? So something like rook h5 to stop. We go h3 to create some prophylactic move. I kind of like this move because it's kind of a grandmaster, typical grandmaster kind of a move, because usually what happens whenever you're trying to attack, you focus only on the attack, right? But here h3 makes such sense because you want to attack but you don't want to create any back rank weaknesses for yourself. And now your idea can be just play queen f4 probably and just queen g4 at some point, or maybe knight. This is also hanging. So bishop c4, queen d4, back, knight here. This is lost. Bishop goes back. Now white just won a tempo against the bishop move. And now bring the final piece in the game. Queen c8 was played, c4 to open up the lines on the d file now. Takes, takes, takes. Queen to b7, queen to g4. And here I believe it was this move where after rook to d6, the final error happened. I believe this was the case. So after rook f5, what do we do? How do we build on this attack? Everything is fine. You're having the perfect position, but how do you improve the position further? So you know this rook is participating, the bishop is participating, the queen is doing everything the queen can right now. But this guy is not doing much. So we just bring rook d1. And now rook into e5 happened and queen f4 happened with the idea to enter like this. And at some point rook d8, queen f8 mate. So black played rook h5, which looks sensible, right? And that's what happens when you play at higher level or when you try to pressure your opponent too much. You create so many problems for your opponent to solve that sometimes it becomes impossible for your opponent to solve everything that you pose. And that's what the funny story. It's like Mikhail Talpez played one of the blitz game in the later part of his life, in the last days of his life against Kasparov. And Kasparov actually had a winning position at the end, but he lost the game. It was a blitz game, so he lost on time. And Kasparov said in an interview that Tal, even in the last days, posed so many problems that it became impossible for me at some point to solve all those problems in the limited amount of time I had. So if it was a classical game or if Kasparov had enough time to play, he would have won the game. That's no doubt, because Tal was down a piece. He sacrificed it actually, but in the limited amount of time Kasparov was having, he was not able to solve the problem. He mentioned about this thing in the interview. Anyways, going in the discussion. So after rook h5, it is actually white to play. You can pause the video. White to play and win. Now the move is, I'll now begin. Rook takes. The point is you cannot take, because the moment you do that, it becomes checkmate. So that was about queen on e7. Earlier we saw queen on c7. Now we have seen queen on e7. So I believe by now you must be having a decent idea of what's the difference between queen e7 and queen c7 plans. Now we'll be seeing some of the ideas specially focused around d5, c5, when black plays both the pawns like this. So let's kind of continue the system. And we reach the typical London position. And here, after captures, obviously always captured by the e pawn. Now black, many times black plays knight h5. Many times this happens, and there are many ways to continue. White chooses bishop e3 in the game, bishop d6, and knight e5. Now it's very important that you control e5. You find good time to control e5. Now it looks like the knight is going to be lost, but actually it's a discovered attack on the opponent's side. Players play g6 at this moment because you can go knight f6 back, but there's again a whole lot of theory in that. Maybe f4 can come or bishop f4 can come. So yeah, so again g6, and you have to understand how does black will again fight for the center by playing something like e5, by provoking white to go away from the e5 square. But every single time white manages to control e5, and that is something which is very beautiful in the London system. Black tries very hard to get e5, and white tries enough to not allow e5 to be lost. So knight, now here in this position, going for the Stonewall setup is not recommended, because had the bishop been on g3 and the knight not on h5 but on f6, as we have seen in the previous cases, then I can just play pawn f4. Then it's no problem. But because the bishop is on e3, if I play f4, the bishop is kind of on a weak square. So white comes up with a very interesting idea, bringing the other knight on f3. Again controlling on e5 square, and black plays f6. Now here you cannot go for a normal retreat. Something like coming back is not the point. If you try to come back, then we have lost the battle of e5. So this is again the moment to think. This is kind of again the moment of truth. You're trying to figure out if e5 is still in our control or have we lost e5. So white came up with a very interesting plan again. White plays the move knight back. Again, if you're wondering what happens after takes, we take, bishop goes away, then I take the knight. And I'll castle long, I'll play bishop d3. It's fine. I still have the pawn on e5, by the way. Just to show you, important to show you. If I take back, okay, now I can just take on h5. I can take on h5. If knight f3, queen f3, I guess that's fine. And look at this. Look at the weakness that has been created all over. We are ready to castle here. We are ready to play this move. But look at the black's position. I'm not so sure if black is super comfortable here. Something like bishop d7. We have just takes, bishop d. The white pieces are just flowing like water, right? Something like that. Okay. In the game, knight g7 was played. And now white has to do something with this guy. So white wants to play h4. Whenever you play g4, so white has again already started the flank attack on the king side. So white wants to go h4 next. But if you go h4, you are losing the knight. So first of all, white solves the problem by taking on c6, takes h4. Now you must be wondering what happens if they play e5, because that was the battle for, right? Actually, that is played on the board. And sometimes you have to see that, okay, it's like maybe you lost one battle, but the war is still going on. Something like that. So we have lost, kind of. Okay, I'm not saying we have actually lost the battle because there's a counterplay. But the thought process should be that we have played already g4, h4. And what should be the right plan to play? Look at the knight on g7. It has no future whatsoever. It can be developed by playing on e6 and then playing maybe c7 or something. I'm not so sure. Or maybe placing it on f4. Knight e6, knight f4, something like this. Can be one of the ideas. But here actually our pawn is under attack. And you cannot go pawn g5 because then knight f5 can happen. So this creates some complications if you go g5 directly. Maybe e4, ef6, queen f6. Knight here. Now you cannot take it, obviously. You cannot take it. Takes, queen takes. Because these are very weak squares. What we have created. We can obviously castle. But if they don't take, even if they don't take, you suppose if they play something like knight f5, yeah, not so sure if this can be played. You can just play something like g5 maybe to continue. The game can go on. c6 is slightly hanging. Not so sure. I'm not super clear with this. But in the game, h5 was played. Bishop g4 happened after a tempo. First of all, pawn e4, h g6. They cannot take it. If you're wondering, because after rook takes, again they cannot take it. If you're wondering, because after I go here, it's kind of, it becomes very difficult for black to play. So rook g8, and now we take, and our plan is very simple. We castle long, we play rook on e1, we play bishop h6, and it's kind of a very tactical way to play this position. After this, we play bishop d3 to protect this guy. Bishop d7, castle, bishop h6, and now you want to understand that, okay, the bishop, queen, this guy, the rook, everyone is participating. This rook is not, so I can play it on e1, but oops, that's a blunder. I can maybe play on d2 and then e2, right? Because now that's protected. The e2 square is protected, so I can just play rook d2, rook e2. And gradually you'll realize that every single piece is participating, and this knight has no future. So that's one way to continue. And anyways, you can maybe just do your own research after this, because I'll be stopping at that point where I feel that white is actually having a very, very, way better position than it was having at the opening. So bishop into g4, and now we go for the same plan. Rook into h7, rook cannot take. We go here. Okay, it's important to maybe just show you what happens if this happens. So takes. And now we have this h8. You have to deal with that, right? And now we have this beautiful 95. You can still go here, we still have 95. If you can go here, we still have this, because after that, we have this. And we still have the better position. So something like if king f7, 95, pawn takes, queen goes there, we take, pawn takes, queen check. These pawns are going to fall off, and again, kind of a decent situation. I guess the king cannot even go up, right? Probably, yeah, if you go here, I just give check. Now you cannot go there because it's important to understand this becomes a checkmate in one. You have to go down, obviously, and you'll lose d5 as well. So this becomes a checkmate. You have to go down somewhere, maybe here, but then d5 is lost. If you go e7, probably e7 is also kind of fine, but then you are having some other checks. Yeah, we have bishop g5. 5 check is fine. Bishop g5, there I just take. Now you go g6, I go. I mean, game can go on, but obviously this is come. We are +2 already, and we are going to be +3 now. And white is having a decent situation. So that's why they cannot take. So rook to g8, queen to a4, attacking this guy. Rook c8, knight goes back. Now the main point with knight to d2 is to play c4 and play this guy and kind of attack. So bring the bishop on the open diagonal. So this is becoming a bit tactical now, but it's important to understand some small sacrifices that are always there. So what happens if they take? How can again white play for a win? So I'll stop here and I'll ask you guys to pause the video. If you've come this far along, if you've stayed in the lecture, by the way, very congratulations. Because I'm not so sure if my viewers will be staying till this long. So anyways, if we have sacrificed a piece on e4, the point is, how do we attack on the lone king on the e file? So I'll now reveal the answer. The idea is we go pawn d5. And now whatsoever you play, this pawn cannot take, it's pinned. And now after knight takes, I don't want to take the knight directly. First of all, check. And something like, if you can block me, I just take you. And again, a decent situation. This is a kind of a decent situation. I'm having 3 pawns for a piece. But look at this guy. Look at the activity. Something like bishop goes back, or something like even if you take me, right? Now I just take a free piece. And whatever, like you go here, I just take a free piece. So bishop has to be saved. So bishop goes back d7. We continue by involving the rook also in the game. Bishop is going to come on c4. This takes, this is happening. And completely winning situation. Completely winning situation. This is clearly over. Okay, this is a very interesting position now. After this, there's only one move. You know, if you look at this position, there's only one move that keeps the game alive for white. Because suppose if white plays a casual move like this, now queen to e4 is just draw. Because whatever you make the move, I just take, I take. And this is just draw, believe it or not. And black will never lose this. The only way to play this is not allow the queen exchanges to happen. So I go here. Now you can go down, but I go bishop to d. Very important. And after this, we have this, and it becomes checkmate. All right. So this was about the nf6 d5 c5 setup. Now I'll be going with some other plans like bishop g4, c5, queen b6 ideas. So before we go with this bishop g4, c5, queen b6 idea, some things need to be mentioned. Okay, now many times you'll find in the London system that people also try to play bishop on f5. So I have included 3 of my games to show you how my opponent tried this bishop f5 line, but there were a lot many ways in which white went bit better against black. So I'll be a bit quick now. So this setup is played with the bishop on here. The idea was to go like this. So bishop f5, I'll be including 3 games here. E6, knight, bishop d6, knight e5, knight e7, bishop b5. Castles, knight to d2, takes, pawn takes. Again, I have won the battle of e5. So once we realize that we have won the battle of e5, we just come back. And after that, I believe it's completely fine situation because you have reached till now, you know that e5 is about to be lost. So sometimes again, it's one of those situations. So if you were following closely, you will again find the right move. I know. So you are knowing that the battle of e5 will be lost eventually. Okay, knight f3 can be done. One of the moves is knight f3. But okay, there's an interesting way to play apart from knight f3. So before we go, I want you guys to, before we go further, I want you guys to again pause the video and figure out the interesting move. And this move takes the inspiration from one of the positions that I was talking about when I was showing the game and the battle of e5 was lost, but not the war. So again, this is again one of the situations. The move is actually the same move. It is d4. The bishop has not much squares to move. Knight took e into f4, bishop g6, h4. Now e5 square is still controlled by white. f6, h5, back, knight f3, takes, queen e7, queen c2. And now after queen to c5, the idea is I don't want to castle right away because of queen f2. Very important thing to note. So now here, there are a lot many ways to continue. The best move is actually knight g5. Now you are attacking on this square, and there's a very crazy move what computer recommends when I was analyzing this game, which is queen f2, king takes, and then just bishop g6. That's what computer recommends. And then there's queen f5, and then maybe e takes, and then the game goes on, or maybe even rook takes, something like rook f5, knight f3, and kind of game continues. But from practical point of view, it's kind of hard to predict. So they can play something like g6 to block it. And now there's very important sacrifice. Takes, bring the rook, pawn, king on the same line. So we can have double check. If the king goes here, we have rook check, back, pawn check, queen check, mate. So this is one of the games. Very quickly, I'll be showing you one more bishop f5 stuff. So d4, d5, knight, bishop f5. And now I go for c4. So I'm changing into kind of a queen's gambit setup with the tempo on d5 and also allowing myself to play queen d3 ideas. e6, knight c3, c5. Kind of a Tarrasch pawn structure. But now knight to b5. The main idea with this bishop on f4 and knight on c3 is to go knight b5. And if the a6 is tried, which is actually the main move, now just continue the regular way. Just go here, play pawn e5, take here, and play the regular setup. So here my opponent played this. I went here, knight a6, queen a4, and now he made the final mistake because after this I have a very clear-cut plan of knight to c7. He played knight b6, but now he was checkmated in just one single move. It's a double check, and it's mate. Even if something else is tried like rook c8, there's a7 hanging, and this is just clearly over. This is clearly over. There's no way to stop it. That is the second game of bishop f5. Let's go for one more. d4, and we reach the same setup. Whenever the opponent is playing bishop f5, I am playing c4 to kind of play this queen b3 idea at some point. Knight, knight e5. I can also come back on g3, that's also fine. But knight e5, c6, and maybe queen c7 is going to come. Takes, queen b3. Now queen b3 hitting here, my opponent played b6, which I think is kind of slightly inaccurate. I brought knight, castles, bishop e2. I also want to castle. Knight e4, rook to d1. So now there's a small trick. The point is, I guess I have told many times that black tries to play this pawn move, and I was knowing that if you try to defend London, people play this pawn f6 move. So that's why instead of casting, I just included this move because I wanted to kind of make sure that my opponent falls for this, and he did play f6. And the moment this was played on the board, I was knowing that it's a clear win because this diagonal is exposed, and now just knight into c6, knight into c6, queen d5. The game goes further, and there's nothing much in the game left. And after this, a couple of moves later, now it's again kind of a decent maneuver. The point is to play e4, rook h3, and just jump in. So this comes with tempo, and this is just clearly finished. Nothing needs to be done here. It's game over already. Okay. So this was all about bishop f5. You can consider playing c4. Analyze more lines on your own on bishop to f5. Okay, so let's see one more interesting game played between Magnus Carlsen and Yu Yangi from 2015 Qatar Masters. Magnus was playing as white, and he started off with London system, and he played pawn d4. Yu played knight f6, not declaring what black wants to go for. Magnus plays bishop f4 right away, declaring that white wants to go for the London. Black plays d5, e3, e6. It means there's no bishop f5, no bishop g4 coming. Knight f3, a6. a6, I'm not so sure too much. Bishop to d3, c5, c3. Bishop d6, bishop g3 back. Knight to c6, knight to d2, castles, knight e5. Knight here, and now maybe they want to play something like knight g6 or knight to f5 at some point, but maybe knight g6 looks more practical. Castles, b6, probably inviting bishop to b7, and bishop h4, knight f5. And after knight f5, very nicely the bishop will be dancing like from g3, h4, g5, f4. So it's not necessary to play the same moves as it was played on the board, but in London there are a lot many ways to continue. So after h3, white is clearly indicating that white wants to go for e4. So once you have played and seen enough London on the board, you'll be able to find these flank attacks very, very fast. Bishop e7, we go a4 to stop this b5 idea because it's very important. As I've mentioned in one of the lines, that white plays a4 many times to stop this b5 push. That's why a6 was played, by the way. Knight d6, f3, because now they want to go on e4, but that was stopped. Knight back, again trying to go for fight of e5. We need to knight f6 back, bishop h2, and at some point break is going to come. And the moment a5 is played, there's no problem of playing this move. And also at some point bishop b5 comes. g4, we need to do g2, and now maybe after f4 g5 is going to come. So f4, and okay, so this is again one of the takes. That is very important because in London, whenever you have to take like this because you have to control the e5 square. That's the whole point of London. e5, and the moment this was played, this was completely over situation. And after knight e5 takes, knight here, knight f3 takes. Just to continue a bit more. Now you can play h4 directly. There's nothing wrong in that. But Magnus played queen g4, h4, rook e6 takes, and there's no way to continue this position. There's lot many threats that are going to come. Queen g6 is one, and how will you stop queen g6 is not so clear. Suppose if you play something like queen here, I take d6, and after queen e5 check, queen takes. This was the end game in which very quickly Magnus won the game, and this is a fork. Let's go back a bit. Let's go back. So suppose I was talking about this idea. So let's try to go here. F4. After this b6 move, probably when Magnus played this bishop h4, g5, f4, you can also just play f4 because we have seen the situation before. When queen was not on e7, it was on c7 and bishop was on b7. It's a similar kind of a situation, and your bishop is already on g3. So because you have seen it already in today's lecture, f4 is kind of the way to go. Magnus played bishop h4, g5, f4, which is kind of a decent variation, decent maneuver in its own right, because after h3, g4, he wanted to kind of put the bishop on h2 and without allowing the counterplay. And then he wanted to go for g4. But f4 is decent. And now, if bishop b7, we have seen so many times the same idea of coming out. Whenever we play the Stonewall setup, we play bishop h4. Knight here, or knight f5, doesn't matter. We are going to take on f6 anyways. And after this bishop g5, there's this is a blunder again. This is kind of a mistake because we can just take on f6 and the queen cannot take. That's the main point because we have 97. This is completely over. And if the pawn takes, I am not so sure what's going on because after takes, this is again clearly over. Okay, so just to point out very important thing that after 97 we were having the same idea with this f4 thing. So different situation but similar pattern. What's going to come in London is if queen is coming on c7 in future, you can just play the Stonewall setup. Also, you can think like that if the bishop is already on g3 rather on e3, d2 or c1. d2 it's very rare to happen in London. It will be either on kind of g5 or f4 or somewhere else, probably, or e3 maybe at some point. If the bishop is on e3, don't play f4. That's the main thing. But if the bishop is on g3, I will obviously play this. I'll play that. I'll take on f6 at some point. Then I'll play this d4, g5, queen f3, queen h3. Like you can just reverse, like go back in the video, and again you'll find the same plan. So this was kind of important thing to when I was analyzing this game. I found this idea with this same pattern, so I thought of just mentioning it in the class. Okay, so now we'll be going with the bishop g4 plan. Earlier we have seen bishop f5, in which we go this c4, queen b3 stuff, and now let's see the bishop g4 plan. So d4, we enter the London and bishop g4, and this is kind of again a decent way to play, but white has a lot of ways to continue. You first of all play the own setup, e6, queen to b3, queen to b6 to stop this b7 idea, queen b7 idea, knight e5. Now again the fight is on e5 square, and we are not giving the e5 square. After c4, queen f4. Queen to b2 is actually a blunder because it allows rook b1, and you might think that okay, you're losing c3 as, but actually knight c6 takes queen c6 is clearly winning. So like if you want to continue, you have this bishop d6, want to go here, take, continue the game, and you win the game. Suppose if they play after this, if they play something like bishop f5 to control this, right? So now they want to go really queen to b2 because you don't have rook b1. So now is the time to play b3. If they take, you take, no problems. If they play normal chess, we go take. If queen takes, we take, and we take on c4 twice. Takes. They have, it's not like we are winning a pawn or something. They can recapture the pawn by going for bishop a3, bishop to b2 stuff. But I feel, okay, just to continue, bishop to a3, king e2, no need to castle because there's no queen on the board. Bishop to b2, rook g1, takes, f3, and then the game goes on. It's not like um, no one is like white is slightly better in this position. Not full better, but only slightly better. That's one line. I can even go a bit further. Knight b3, a5, knight c5, knight here, just bishop here. We have e4 moves at some point, and the game goes on. Okay, the game goes on. All right. So here, let's go back. After this bishop g4, suppose they play queen b6 directly, you know, without playing this e6 move, so that it keeps some flexibility to go back also for the bishop, and also they're trying to attack me directly. Now I can just take here. Again, queen takes b2 won't happen because of the very obvious rook to b1. Queen c3, it looks like, oh my god, what's going on? But we have rook b7, queen c5. And then again, this knight is very loose. You know, you're having queen b1, bishop b5. I believe this is completely crushed situation. And just to show you a line, this is just 4. Okay, so all right. Now, suppose if something else. After c3, if they play queen b6, and now we go for the stakes, and let's say that okay, they play sensible chess, they take on c5. We want to go on knight e5 at some point to control e5, but obviously not right now because it's a queen move. And I've said it so many times that whenever the bishop comes out, this b7 pawn is always loose. That's very obvious. Yeah, so the bishop does the job of protecting b7, so we go queen b3. And after queen b3, we are attacking here directly. Something like this is just a blunder, because now again, I'll ask you guys to pause the video. You can pause the video, figure it out why it's a blunder. It is white to play and take advantage. And now, without a further waste of time, I'll just show the move. Queen a4, knight b3. The queen is actually trapped in the middle of the board, and whatever happens, we just get the queen. If queen b6 back, we don't have to go queen a4 anymore, because now we can just throw in bishop b5. And now the point is I want to go knight d4 or probably knight d5. Maybe knight d4 looks good. Right? After takes, knight d4. And yeah, I guess it's decent setup to continue. So again, we are not giving up the e5 square. This is completely not winning for white, but at least white is doing fine. White can just castle like this, play the normal game. Okay, so that was slightly about the bishop g4 stuff. And let's go with some other systems. Suppose if something else is played, something like if b6, d6, and things like that are played. Suppose if b6 idea is played. So now you can just go for normal chess. b6, d6 setup is included on the board. You can maybe provoke c6. Or they can play something like bishop d7. Then you can come back, they'll play bishop c6, bishop d7, like that. And yeah, we have this setup. And after this, I guess it's kind of normal to play d5. You have this, and eventually you'll castle here, bishop d3, and white is again doing fine. Up a pawn. Now after this b6 and d6 move, you have to understand that okay, after this b6 and d6 move, you have to understand that the light squares are very weak. They do have a light square bishop to kind of protect and keep an eye on those squares, but after we go bishop b5 to provoke c6, now you can just come back because now you want to go to f3, I believe. Something like that, or maybe just go here. Maybe that's even better. Anyways, they go here. Now you can just come back e2, and the same idea remains. We have to go f3. That's one thing to go for. Um, I guess if they go something like probably d6, let's say. Okay, I guess if after b6 they go probably g6, right? So not revealing their true colors, we can go h4 directly. So we are also not in intention of casting anyways. h5, we go knight out. And now again, to see these pawns, and we go c4. And this is kind of a decent way to play. If suppose after knight f3, if uh, if d5 is played, then maybe then what's the point of playing this b6 first? Because then you're blocking your own bishop. You can continue by bishop a6 as well, maybe, but then we still have c4. Okay, so if b6 and g6 is played, why in modern lines I don't want to go for the full variations? Because first of all, I would suggest the audience to make their clarity on all the standard variations that I mentioned at the top, and only at the end you can search for these sidelines like b6, d6, g6, e6, and then combinations like d6, b6 together, b6, g6 together, e6, sorry, d6, g6 together, e6, g6 together, something like that. So it creates a lot of complications, a lot of permutations are involved. And the point is, if you go g6, we have h4. If you go b6 and d6, you create light square weaknesses. So we have the bishop ideas. If you go for e6 and b6, then probably I can just play c4 and knight c3, which I'll be showing in a couple of minutes. Okay, so let's go for the b6 and e6 setup. So now just knight d2, the same London setup what we know here. Bishop e5, bishop takes, and the knight is kind of trapped. After after c5, we go here. They don't have to, they can even continue like this, and then I guess it becomes the same setup. It becomes a similar kind of a thing what we have discussed so many times. And after knight d7, probably. Okay, if I give you guys this situation, what would you do in this situation? So it's kind of a blender here. Kind of a blender here. Because the bishop is hanging, so you can just go knight c6 takes. And if suppose after c4 we go back with the castle, just normal chess, I can still feel that okay, f4 should be the right move here. You know, you can even go e4, but I feel just go f4. Why? Because we have seen the Stonewall setup for so many times now. So a5 or b5 can be played, maybe b5. Let's go with b5 and this bishop h4, b7, and this castles. a5, continue. I mean, probably queen f3. So we have seen the similar setup. You can again go back to the discussion and you'll be finding it so many times. 97, probably 97. And maybe just g4 at some point. 4 at some point. 5, h4, h5, 5. It will go on. If suppose after this, if they play something like pawn g6, then we can go for a similar kind of a setup. c4. So what happens in modern systems like b6, d6, g6, h6 combinations of 1 or 2 or 3, we always put pawn on c4 and then we just go knight c3 most of the times. Or you can even go something like knight to d2 if you feel that the system can be changed into the original systems, that the original or standard systems as I might call it, eventually. If you are sure, or maybe if you have that feeling, you can just go for the normal c3 knight d2 setup. Okay, so okay, let's see some more lines. After here, they can also go something like e6. But this is again, we are not so sure if black wants to actually go for b6 or c5, or black wants to just go for t5. So we can just continue. We don't know, so we will just continue. So black wants to go for combinations. If black wants to go for d5, we already know we have to go knight f3, knight d2, c3. If they try to put bishop d6, we come back, put knight e5. And then we have this f4 push. That's why not knight e5 I recommend, because then you don't have the Stonewall system. Then the Stonewall goes away all the way. The Stonewall is broken. That's why I recommend to come back with the bishop on g3. So at some point you have the Stonewall system. It's very powerful to play the Stonewall with the bishop out on g3. They have to play something like b6, queen f3, and provoking. Okay, c6 has to be played or d5 has to be played. Knight c6, knight here, castles, e4. So many things to understand, that you have to control e5 as well as you have to control e4. So black wants to try to castle, you want to try to castle, but you have to control e5 as well as e4. And it's all about the mixing up of ideas. I'm not saying that okay, after this castles here, you can also just continue by knight g2, kind of a similar decent plan, or you can just continue by h4 maybe. That's fine. But e4 looks natural because you're not knowing where what's the intention of black is. Black will play something like d6, kind of a hedgehog defense, and castle like this, or black is going to play d5. But if black is not taking control of the center, why not just we take control of the center? Something like that. Okay, so I guess the lecture is kind of stretching almost more than an hour. So I'll stop here, and you guys can do a bit more research on this b6, d6, g6, h6. I have done quite something. And if you guys like this video, this full video, you can please let me know in the comment section. And if you want a separate discussion of b6, d6, h6, and then combinations of those, ignoring the standard variations, obviously you can do that. You can let me know in the comment section. I'll create a separate video for these variations, these sidelines. But I'll stop right now for the moment in the London systems, and I hope I was able to give some added clarity to most of you out there who were trying to go for the London system. Because I've received this in so many comments that people are saying that they play London, they like to play London, but they are not able to win in London. So there's one thing as playing, one is called as winning. And I hope after watching this, maybe if you watch it 2 to 3 times, try to actually understand the ideas of e4, e5 squares. How will black try to fight for it? How will you change into Stonewall? When to change into Stonewall, when not to? And how do you achieve pawn e4 breaks at some point? If you play this move by move, and if you try to understand it actually from the very practical point of view, I'm sure you'll be able to get uh, kind of good in London system. With that said, I'll take your leave for now. I'll see you guys in the next video. Like the video, share the video, do whatever you want to do with the video. Okay, so I'll take your leave, and a very good night to everyone. It's late, it's already 2 a.m. here, so I'll just stop. Thank you. Bye bye. Take care. Good night.